Hello, and thanks for coming out on a workday afternoon. Although I'm speaking today about, I guess, my background and everything, I do want to acknowledge my firm. Woha is a firm of around 100 people, and particularly my partner, Wong Man Sum, who founded Woha with me. We have some guys from the office in the corner over there. So I think every architect goes on their own journey, but a lot of it is interactions with people along the way. But today I'll be sharing a particularly kind of personal journey about some aspects of my interests which have really impacted my architecture, but as per the rules, we're not allowed to talk about our projects. First one is I just thought I was a cute baby, so I put this in. Mid-60s, I was born in 66, in Perth in Western Australia. It's a very, I think, idyllic place to grow up. Sunny, lots of gardens, lots of nature. So I think I had quite a privileged childhood, and it was in the years before everyone was too concerned about academic performance. So lots of playing and running around. My parents really liked the bush and the countryside, and we had some sort of family connection to different areas of the state. So we would climb mountains and go bushwalking and things. So this is with my mum and my sister. And then again with my dad way down south near the Fitzgerald River National Park at an old Hassell family homestead. So it's a ruined barn in the background from around the 1860s. And then time goes on, and this is my parents at my 50th birthday in Singapore at an exhibition I put on. But my parents really were a big influence on me. Mum was from a sort of a Swiss-Italian family who had a kind of European intellectual idea about education, so the house was full of books. And my dad's a geologist and a botanist, and so it was one of those parents that you could ask them any question and he would instantly know the answer. And as we drove through landscapes, he would give me the deep geological history. And a bit of a David Attenborough too, like he really liked animals and nature. So that was a really, now looking back on it, I think I was really privileged as a kid, whose parents, instead of saying, "Don't touch the animal," would say, "Have you picked up a snake yet?" And the other thing about Dad was he was really interested in sustainability. So this off-grid house he built in the 1980s, 1981, I think it was finished with all its own solar and water and everything. So, and he actually air-conditioned his own offices in Perth with a lithium bromide concentrating parabola solar air conditioning system in the 1970s. So quite early familiarity with solar technology. Then when I moved to Singapore, because of a big recession in Perth, so in the 80s, when I graduated, 89, there were no jobs for architects. So in every university in the whole of Australia, it's called the Perth Mafia, because my cohort either did a PhD and got into academia, or they left Australia and worked all around the world. So I worked in Singapore because of my aunt and uncle. Met Mansum, we set up Woha in 1994, and so it's we've crossed 30 years now of practice. So just a few things from my childhood and my father and different things. So I've always been very interested in nature, sort of interesting science, textiles and fabrics, and patterns. So that's something I'll get into. And then this I found was from my father's PhD, which ended up looking exactly like some of the artworks I make. But these are electron microscope photographs of pollen. But it was a bit weird to see that same shapes appearing from a different field at different times. These are some local ferns which go in fractal patterns. Corals are an interesting way of packing. This is a Kuba textile. from Africa, but I find this a very interesting combination of repetition and difference, I think, which makes it a very fascinating surface, even though it's composed of so few things. So a very architectural solution in a way, and like how do you create interest out of standard components. This is biological drawings, photographs out of the window of a plane. Paul Klee I was interested in just because someone gave me a book as a child, and then I tend to see his paintings everywhere somehow because I just read it at a really impressionable age. And I do collect sort of strange objects and things that inspire me or just seem to have an appealing form, and they occasionally appear later in architecture, like many years later, without consciously thinking about it. Also art from my childhood, so rather than a sort of sophisticated art aficionado's idea of things, but really art that just grabbed me and then also seemed to get stuck in my head. So this, for instance, was a series of little terrace houses we did in Singapore with this Escher-like stair that you would see from below and above and reflected in the swimming pool. Another Paul Klee, so I really like this checkerboard painting he did where suddenly there were grey squares in between the black and the white, and that seemed to really have a correlation with the idea of indoor, outdoor and in-between space in the tropics, and that ended up in a project in Victoria Park. Richard Serra's sculptures sort of appeared in the stadium station at Boulevard, and then Jan Schoenhoven, which is a Dutch architect who does very dry, kind of pattern repetitive based art, but it was something that appeared in the cladding of the same station as an aluminium extrusion. Piranesi, I think all architects have a Piranesi phase, but there's aspects of that appeared in our Brasbasa station as well, just the sort of the drama of towering infrastructure that seems out of scale for humans. Another, this one by Escher I didn't even notice or remember, but then it seemed to be exactly the design of the Park Royal on Pickering when I saw it years later. And so this interest in art has been around all my life, and it was really, like recently we designed the exhibition for Tropical at the National Gallery of Singapore, and that was, again, a very weird sort of art about architecture, because Lina Bo Bardi was one of the key references in the exhibition, and so it was a really nice chance to visit an architect who was really interested in art, their own work about 70 years later, and reinterpret it again. So this idea of things echoing and mirroring and reappearing years later has been very interesting. When I got into Balinese art when we were designing the resort in Bali, Alila Villas, I bought some old 1930s art that happened to belong to Margaret Mead and Gregory Bateson. And he became, while he was an anthropologist accompanying Margaret, became a key cybernetics thinker and wrote really interesting interdisciplinary work which is still revealing important insights, I think. And there's a particular aspect he's interested in patterns, which now with AI, like everything is about pattern recognition. And he was interested in sort of patterns of patterns and what happens when you have these meta patterns that build one on top of each other. And similarly, there was a whole group of thinkers in the 70s who wrote these books like The Tao of Physics. And Fritjof Capra is one of them that's continued. And like this idea of systems is something that's become important in our thinking in Woha. And in that, he refers to a lot of Eastern philosophy, for instance, these like Buddhist sutras, and something that I started working through in the art as well as like about everything being connected as nets and ties, and that like there's no meaning to a part of a net unless it's connected to the entire net. And so I always drift into sort of big ideas of philosophy because I do feel in some ways as architects we're imagining the future and how we're going to live on this planet, and unless we have a sort of solid grounding in what we think the future should be like. We just end up being reactive and responsive to daily activities. So the good ancestor, I thought, in fact, you don't really need to read the book. You just have to read the Jonas Salk quote on the front. But the question, are we good ancestors, is really important, I think. So, you can say the present is something we're borrowing from our descendants. And I think a lot of short-term thinking at the moment means we're being really terrible ancestors. A writer who explores this more, Jeremy Lent, is really worth reading. So this book, The Web of Meaning, takes a lot of Western philosophy and Eastern philosophy, but also integrates it with First Nation philosophy as well. And I think there's really important lessons to us, which I'm sure in terms of the next speaker, we'll hear more of learning from traditional ways of doing things. So Serious Play and Meta Patterns is this art program that I've been doing for many years, but sort of ramped up when I exhibited it at my 50th birthday. So this was an exhibition with Fine Art. So it's basically taking the idea of patterns and tessellations, but using modern mathematics to explore tilings that weren't around when Escher was working on them. So they're particularly aperiodic tilings or tilings that have interesting visual qualities. They generally work on this substitution idea. So it's basically like if you keep replacing one tile with smaller versions of itself in a way that lock together in interesting ways, you can build up these patterns that are fractal in scale, like they keep enlarging. You can make it as big as the universe and it still has a interesting organization to it. So going back to that early obsession with Escher, so this I thought was quite fun. It's like a spatial tessellation with a sort of impossible space in it. Some of these things I did ended up as like new research, so I did even publish a mathematical paper on these tilings. And then these ideas started feeding themselves back into our architecture. And so some just in interior design and components. This is a Jali screen in India. A tile, if you go to Punch Coffee down on North Canal Road, you can sit on a aperiodic fractal tiling of coffee leaves. We made a pavilion in Paris using a space-filling curve of these, which these sort of effects are interesting to me, where when you saw the light coming through the screen through a curtain, it really felt like you were under a natural tree. Other ones appeared in cladding. So this is a project in China with an Aman tiling, which was interesting given that Aman Resorts. There's a mathematician called Robert Aman and made these tilings. And then recently I've done a couple of exhibitions in spaces because so off the pattern idea and more into the idea of architecture and time. So this first one was at Temangong in an old house, and I thought it would be interesting to show how Singapore had changed outside this room. So the idea is you're looking through the walls in space, you're looking through in time, and then I populate the room with people that have been there over the last, in this case it was about 80 years, and put them all together. So the idea is when you're in the room, you're kind of joining this parade of history through the room, almost like a cocktail party with characters from the past. And it was sort of fun doing the research. So this is also something I'm very interested in, is like the materiality of digital art. So this was all drawn on iPad in small pieces and pieced together. It's done as vector, so it's like perfectly crisp even at the full size. And then I also like the idea at the end it was destroyed, so it was printed on mulberry paper, glued to the wall, and then scraped off afterwards. And so it's totally not a kind of image you can easily consume on your phone, even though it's a digital image. Another exhibition followed up in the private museum, an old house in Singapore that we did a lot of research into the history of. And so this had some of my conventional work, but also another history room. And this house was amazing. Like, it revealed all these incredible stories of people in Singapore's history, starting from Raffles and Farquhar. So it was built by Prinsep, Charles Prinsep. And then really strange things started happening where it turned out like his son knew my father's mother and sold a horse to my father's grandfather. So it was a very strange process where, so the guy on the horse is my great-grandfather. And he actually impacted all of Western Australia. So in terms of being the protector of the Aboriginals, who wrote the disastrous Aborigines Act, which caused a stolen generation. And so it was very weird to find like sort of one room made connections to all these stories. And I think that's part of the power of architecture, is to think how it becomes a locus for all the flows of community and economics and social and cultural change can happen in these same walls. So the table in the middle laid out all the discoveries we made about the history of this house. This time I was a bit smarter, so we managed to peel them off the wall better and cut them up. So if any of you, I'm sort of selling them to raise money for the private museum, which is Institute of Public Character, like a charity. So if anyone's interested, I still have quite a few of them. The art facade idea has continued in quite a few projects. This is one in Perth where this cladding idea has an abstract pattern aspect to it, but also has a historical dimension to it. So within the patterns are the layers of history that you can see in the limestone cliffs around the Swan River near here, where it's been variously under forests, in sand dunes, underwater, and so this history is revealed in the skin. Another project where we did that, Carpenter Street, an old remittance house, and the remittance letters contained poems written by the Chinatown letter writers who would summarize the feelings of the migrant workers in Singapore through these poems and include them in the letters. And so we hid them in the facade of the building, a bit like a puzzle. And then at various moments, like when the sun comes through the room, it illuminates and projects a little poem on the curtain. So there's 20 of those poems hidden around the building, if any of you want to go there. Last bit I sort of wanted to think about was about how things are changing. So I wrote this little diagram I did a few years ago. It hasn't changed substantially, I think. So I do think there's a worry with AI that somehow the fun stuff seems to be taken away from us by the computer and done in 5 seconds, but the tedious 5-year process is the one that's been left with us. And so I have some worry about that, but I also have some hope. So this is my nightmare idea, I think, where we end up we think we're curating, but all we're really doing is shopping and choosing, and I think it's not a particularly exciting creative process. The other one I think is at the same time I developed this diagram. So I think there's some interesting idea of artificial, human, and cosmic intelligence that in some ways everything is a kind of giant computer calculating stuff. And we have different interactions between these domains of knowledge that are very necessary. So I said the design of the future sort of sit in the middle, a kind of good ancestor spot in the middle where we can combine the mechanistic, humanistic, and sort of Gaia viewpoint to thrive and to understand and to delight. This book recently I was given by someone, so I'm only halfway through it, but I would really recommend it. I think it's really fascinating. He is one of the inventors of the microchip, and he thinks that there is no way artificial intelligence will ever be conscious or creative, and that consciousness is actually like a key quality in the universe, and it's something about the cell, which is the information and the material and the exchange is all happening as one thing. So he calls that live information, that the structure of the cell is actually part of the information. And so I think that that's giving me a lot of hope that, that there's still a role for us creatives in a world of really powerful computing. This was a little sketch I did about how, this idea that if we can use this systems thinking to connect and improve and make flows that we can get systems effects basically from the same stuff we have now, the same investment, but we can get much better outcomes just through our buildings starting to interact a lot more with the systems around them. And so this systems approach is something we've been developing for quite a while. So right from the beginning of our practice, so the first one we did was an exhibition called More on Less, and then another one, Singapore 2050, looking at self-sufficiency, whether Singapore can be self-sufficient in food, energy, and water, and shrink its footprint to the size of the island. We then had an exhibition in Germany and published a book on some of these ideas. And recent book. But basically what our first book had some measures that we think by developing these more with that sort of idea of the 3 domains, but here using social, cultural, economic, and technological and ecological, that we can measure things better and design better to get greater outcomes. So these were our principles for form follows systems, which is something that we're now following in our projects. But I think the key idea is making the problem as big as you can, like nothing is outside the domain of the architect. It sounds a little bit egotistical, but in another way, I think architects are the only people that their expertise is in knowing a little bit about a lot of things and assimilating that knowledge and working with experts to make things come together. So that is the end of my talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard, for taking us to your cabinet of curiosities and also linking them with some of the projects. I wonder if you share also that passion for these curiosities with your partners, or does he think you're crazy sometimes?
Yes, I think more, not so much on a general sharing, but as things come up with projects where they're useful, it's great to be able to say, oh, I've got a picture of that at home where it reminds me of this kind of object. Maybe there's some things we could look at there. And our own office at WOHA is quite a similar collection of things that we bring into the office. Okay. So we have artworks and artifacts and plants and all kinds of things at our office.
What do you think has been the attributes in the collaboration with your partner that has helped to establish an architecture office and to do well, I will say, in the architecture industry? Are there any attributes that you recognize or?
Yes, we're quite an interesting partnership, I think, in that we have a big amount of overlaps. So we both love drawing and designing, but we're both quite strong on the mathematical and science and sort of financial side in terms of managing that and understanding with the clients. And then in terms of interest in culture and history, all these things are very much overlapping as well.
And when you discover something that is, you say you wrote a paper regarding mathematics and so on, your brother is kind of a mastermind.
A mathematician.
Did you ask him for advice with those kind of things, or you talk to him about this, or is like better?
No, I talk to him and I share them. And in fact, one of his collaborators is more interested in the kind of geometry, so he always sends it through. And then when that book came up, the one about quantum consciousness, I sent that off to him and said, is this legit or is it is this woo-woo craziness?
What does he say?
He said it potentially sounded legit, yes.
Because I don't know between brothers, like, I don't know, it's supportive or he will say, no.
Oh no, we're quite, I think we're in separate domains, so we're not competing, we're just
that's good.
Sharing, yeah.
You mentioned about the ancestors and the questions, are we being good ancestors? You say there are some things that regarding short terms that are not putting us in a dangerous position. I wonder, how could we be good ancestors?
I think it really is the long-term aspect. It's really an attitude towards time. Something we've been doing at NUS in our studio that we run there is working with the economics department. And that's been really interesting because they recognize that a central problem with long-term planning is accurately estimating the value of that. And so they're helping us come up with a suite of tools for calculating the value to the commons, of like fresh air and parks and biodiversity and public space. So I think that's really interesting because it's not that nobody wants to do it, it's just that everyone's under pressure to justify it. And with these kind of economic tools, it just say if you invest in this, long term it pays back so well, you'd be crazy not to. With that, people like the Ministry of Finance can say, sign off on something. So I think it's, unfortunately with the world we have, the world's controlled by economists, but economists are not bad people. They just need the tools to be able to assess whether something is an economically brilliant idea. Most of these things we know instinctively are economically brilliant ideas and get frustrated that they won't be funded. I think that's the gap we have to close.
All right, I hope so. I remember something that when we had our online event during the pandemic where you participated, that we talk about the journey of an architect and bad moments or good moments. You're mentioning that bad moments or losses are kind of part of the journey. I wonder if there has been any specific moment in your architecture career that something felt as a big loss that later helped you in a way, was a kind of learning for your journey.
Yes, I mean, the one competition particularly which we didn't win, which was the Duxton plane competition in Singapore, and we were really disappointed because we felt like we had a lot of great ideas, and in some ways that project we've continued to build parts of it in the years ahead, and some aspects of it was that if you built a sky garden, it was counted as GFA, and so we didn't comply with the floor area limit. But it was interesting that was then changed by URA about a couple of years later, and so we could. It was sort of nice that we didn't win it because of a whole lot of roadblocks, and then all those roadblocks, whether through our own lobbying or other people doing it, have been removed, and so. That thing that we felt was such a disaster that we didn't get what we felt. I mean, the project was built is a very beautiful project now. Anyway, just, for us it was a tragedy
at the moment. But you could kind of take some things from that project to others.
It was sort of a seminal moment in terms of a lot of things coalesced together, and I think this systems thinking, like it had a lot of integration of that already in that project. So so we always see now competitions as just a chance to really explore ideas, and they feed the subsequent work for years after that.
That's good, a good way to see it. One last one, you have a huge interest in art, and I remember that you mentioned you have at least a few years ago, like from 5 to 10, time for creative time, and then from 10 to 6, other tasks. Do you still organize your time that way, or how do you organize your interests?
Yes, so I do get up really early, around 5 a.m. And I do have that sort of 5 hours in the morning. As I get older, sometimes I realize I just lie there.
5 to 7 are still in bed? No.
And sometimes the news of the world's so terrible you can't stop scrolling, so I've tried to stop doing that. But I do find that a really important part of the day. I mean, it's just, I'm lucky I'm a morning person, so I do tend to wake up early naturally.
As an Australian, it feels like all the Australians wake up very early.
Yes, well, a sun in Australia in summer gets up at like 3:30 or 4.
Well, that's crazy.
So yeah, maybe it's baked in as a kid. But I do really like that quiet thinking time. And since COVID too, I've also tried to make Mondays and Fridays free of meetings as much as possible and try and have a whole day of deep work time to try and focus on things.
That's good. Richard, we were so happy to have you again on the stage. So thank you for the talk, and later we'll have the roundtable discussion together. But for now, thank you.